The galaxy had forgotten the sound of human steel. For centuries, the stars had been ruled by alien empires, their flags planted over shattered colonies and their fleets patrolling the silence where humanity once thrived. The memory of Earth's great warships had faded into legend, whispered about in the darkest corners of conquered space. Some called them myths, relics of a people who had burned too brightly and vanished. Others swore humanity had left behind something more, something waiting. And then one day, the silence broke. It began with a signal, not the ordered pulse of a fleet patrol or the random noise of background radiation, but a deep resonance, low and steady, echoing through the void like a heartbeat. Across the outer colonies, sensors screamed with warnings. Merchant crews looked up from their consoles with wide eyes, and alien officers ordered silence, unsure whether to fear or dismiss what they had heard. The signal was old, older than any living species that ruled the stars now. And within its rhythm was a voice, a human voice. Long buried beneath the wreckage of forgotten wars, the black ship stirred. Its hull was scarred, its engines dormant, but its heart still lived. For ages it had slept, hidden in the cold dark between systems, carrying the last code of an extinct resistance. It had been abandoned by time, sealed away with the weight of 1,000,000 lost battles. But something or someone had awakened it. The galaxy that thought humanity finished was about to learn that the war had only been paused. The aliens who ruled the spiral arms had grown complacent. They thought the conquered human spirit was broken beyond repair. Humans lived as scattered remnants, slaves on mining worlds, merchants begging for scraps, wanderers in the shadow of stronger species. Yet in the shadows of defeat, a rumor had endured. A rumor of a warship so powerful it had never been captured, one built not just with metal, but with the very soul of its makers. A ship that could turn the tide of destiny. Few believed it. Even fewer dared to seek it. Until now, on a forgotten moon, a small group of humans uncovered a hidden chamber deep beneath the surface. They weren't soldiers. They weren't leaders. They were survivors, desperate for a spark of hope. The chamber's walls were lined with forgotten symbols of an old fleet, and at the center rested a console glowing faintly with power that should have been long dead. When their trembling hands reached out, the chamber responded, and the dormant systems awoke. Lights flickered in the dust, and deep in the void the black ship answered. The ship was no ordinary machine. It was alive in ways no alien technology could ever match. Built in humanity's final age of defiance, it carried within it a mind, an echo of those who had fought, who had refused to surrender. It was more than a weapon. It was a guardian, designed to awaken only when humanity's need was greatest. And now that time had come. Across the stars, alien rulers felt it, a disturbance like the stirring of an ancient predator. Their empires had been built on the ashes of humanity's fall. If the black ship had returned, then their rule was no longer secure, but awakening something lost to time comes with a price. The black ship did not rise as a savior without cost. Its return sent shockwaves through the galactic order. Some humans feared it as much as they hoped for it, wondering if the same power that once brought ruin would bring salvation or destruction. To wield it meant more than flying a warship. It meant inheriting the burden of an unfinished war, and facing enemies who would do anything to crush this spark before it grew into fire. As the ship's engines roared to life for the first time in centuries, the stars seemed to tremble. From hidden vaults, ancient weapons extended, systems locked on distant signals, and a voice rose from within the core. It was not the voice of a machine, but of something older, something that remembered the screams of dying worlds, and the vow of humanity never to bow. It spoke not in words, but in a command that burned into the hearts of those who heard it. Rise. The black ship had not been built to hide. It had been built to return. The galaxy was not ready. The empires that thought themselves eternal had no place for humanity's return. Fleets were dispatched, spies sent to uncover the truth, and hunters prowled the void seeking the ship before it could fully awaken. But every movement they made only fed the legend, and every whispered rumor became louder. Across the colonies, enslaved humans looked to the stars with new hope. Something had changed. Something unstoppable had begun, yet even as hope spread, shadows gathered. The black ship was powerful, but it was not invincible. Its awakening was incomplete, its systems fractured by centuries of silence. Those who touched its controls felt the weight of its memory, the demand for sacrifice. The ship would not follow those unworthy. It would test them, force them to prove not just their will to survive, but their will to lead. And in that moment, humanity's fate balanced on a knife's edge. For if the wrong hands claimed the black ship, the galaxy might face a terror far greater than the empires already in power. The stars watched as the ship broke free of its tomb, its shadow stretching across the void. Alien admirals tightened their grips on power, humans whispered prayers in the dark, and the warship itself loomed between past and future. Was this the rebirth of freedom, or the beginning of something darker? The black ship's awakening was no end. It was the spark of a storm, one that would either free the conquered or consume them all. And as its engines burned across the night, one truth became clear. The galaxy was about to be rewritten. But no one yet knew whether by salvation or by vengeance. The black ship's voice grew louder, carrying across the stars like thunder, and with it came a question that none could answer. When destiny awakens, who will rise to command it? The story had only begun. The awakening of the black ship spread across the galaxy like a whisper carried on a storm. No one could explain how something so old, hidden in silence for centuries, could still breathe with such power. Yet every listening post, every deep-range scanner, and every hidden resistance group felt the same signal rumbling beneath their feet. Some dismissed it as ancient debris stirred by cosmic drift. Others swore it was a warning, a heartbeat announcing the return of something that had once struck terror into the stars. And on worlds where humanity still lived in chains, the signal meant more than science could measure. It meant the possibility of hope. The small band of humans who had uncovered the chamber never expected to find themselves at the center of a storm. They were miners, scavengers, and wanderers. Their lives had been shaped by survival, not war. Yet when the chamber had opened, and the ship's dormant core had answered, they understood something none of them dared to say aloud. The galaxy was not the same anymore. The black ship had chosen to stir, and it had chosen them as witnesses. Each of them felt the weight of that choice pressing against their chest like gravity. They knew that once the ship fully woke, it would not allow them to simply walk away. The aliens who ruled the spiral arm had not forgotten humanity's defiance. Long ago, when the last human fleets burned, they had feared the black warships more than any weapon ever forged. Those vessels had been designed not only for destruction, but for endurance. Built in secret shipyards, hidden in places no enemy could chart, they carried technologies so dangerous that even humanity itself had hesitated to use them. When the final battles came, most had been destroyed, cut down by overwhelming numbers. But the records whispered of a single vessel that vanished before the fall. A ship said to carry not just weapons, but a soul. That ship had now stirred, and the empires knew it. Across distant command halls, alien leaders studied the signals with unease. Their fleets were vast, their weapons unmatched, yet this sound from the void gnawed at their certainty. They had crushed humanity, broken their worlds, and scattered their survivors to the edges of existence. But the black ship had been the nightmare they could never kill. Its return meant their victory was not absolute. No matter how strong they were, no empire could afford a legend to rise again. Their orders spread quickly. Find the source. Silence it before the whisper became fire. Meanwhile, deep in the void, the ship's shadow loomed larger. Its hull, once cloaked in darkness, now revealed the scars of old wars. Fused metal, shattered plating, and the burn marks of battles long past told the story of a vessel that had endured more than it should have. Yet beneath the scars, power stirred. Lights rippled across its surface like veins glowing with lifeblood. Inside its chambers, systems once thought dead began to breathe again. Ancient weapons hummed faintly, shields flickered to life, and a voice, deep and steady, echoed through the corridors. Those who stepped inside did not hear it with their ears but with their hearts. It did not speak in language but in command, demanding resolve from those who dared enter. The survivors who first touched its core struggled to understand what they had awakened. They felt tested, as if the ship itself was watching them. Every panel they activated resisted at first, as if weighing their worth. The ship was not a tool to be wielded. It was a force that would choose whether or not to obey. Some among them feared it, whispering that they had unleashed something too great to control. Others stood taller, feeling a fire in their veins for the first time in their lives. For them, the Black Ship was not a curse. It was the last chance for their people to rise again. The stars outside grew restless. Signals from alien fleets flickered across the void. Resistance cells on distant worlds stirred with new purpose. And deep within the Black Ship, systems pulsed like a heart ready to beat again. The line between past and present blurred, and those within knew that whatever came next, the galaxy would never return to silence. The Black Ship's awakening was not an accident. It was the beginning of something greater, something unstoppable. But whether that something was salvation or ruin, no one yet knew. And as the first alien warships crossed into the sector, their weapons glowing in the darkness, the Black Ship remained silent, waiting, watching, testing. Its voice whispered within the minds of those who had woken it, a single question burning through their thoughts. Would they rise to lead, or would they fall as those before them had fallen? The answer had not yet come. The Black Ship hung in the darkness like a shadow that did not belong, half alive and half dreaming. Its engines pulsed faintly, casting long streaks of light into the void, yet it remained silent, waiting. Within its massive frame, the survivors who had awakened it felt both awe and unease. They had stumbled onto something greater than themselves, and every step deeper into the ship's halls reminded them of that truth. The vessel wasn't just a machine, it was history reborn, carrying scars of battles fought long before they were born. And now they were caught between the pull of its power and the weight of its expectations. The main conflict pressed in from every side. Alien fleets were converging, drawn by the signal that had spread like wildfire. The empires had spent centuries erasing humanity's legacy, ensuring their stories of defiance were buried in ruins and silence. Now that silence had been broken, and they were terrified of what it meant. To them, the Black Ship wasn't a relic. It was a threat to their control, a symbol strong enough to ignite rebellion across countless worlds. They would not wait to see if it was truly awake. They would destroy it before it had a chance to breathe. Already, scouts circled the edges of the system, their sensors searching for its trace. Inside, tension among the survivors deepened. Some believed they had been chosen for a purpose. Others doubted they were meant to be here at all. Arguments broke out in the ship's dark corridors as they debated what to do. Should they flee, using the ship's strength to vanish deeper into the void? Should they reveal themselves to the human colonies still under alien rule, risking exposure but sparking hope? Or should they prepare for war, standing their ground, even though they had no training and no certainty that the ship would obey them fully? Each choice carried dangers, and the Black Ship itself seemed to listen as they spoke, its humming voice rising or falling with their disagreements. One of them, a scavenger who had spent his life pulling scraps from abandoned wrecks, argued that they should run. He had seen firsthand what alien fleets could do, and no legend, no matter how powerful, could withstand an armada forever. Another, who had lost her family to the chains of occupation, demanded they fight. For her, the Black Ship wasn't just a vessel. It was vengeance given form. A third spoke with quieter conviction, suggesting that the ship had a will of its own, and perhaps they needed to earn its trust before it would decide their fate. None of them knew which was right, and that uncertainty gnawed at them like hunger. Meanwhile, the Black Ship itself revealed fragments of its memory. In dreams and whispers, it showed flashes of its past commanders, their voices echoing through time. Images of burning stars, collapsing fleets, and desperate last stands bled into the minds of those who touched its walls. It was as if the ship wanted them to understand the cost of what it carried. It had been forged not in triumph, but in desperation. It was humanity's last weapon, built when hope had already begun to die. And though it had survived, it had not forgotten the fire that consumed its kin. The survivors felt the burden of that memory pressing against them, as though the ship itself was asking if they were strong enough to carry it forward. Outside, the first wave of alien patrol ships closed in. Small craft, probing the system, careful but relentless. They scanned every asteroid, every pocket of debris, searching for the source of the ancient signal. The survivors knew it was only a matter of time before the hunters found them. The black ship remained silent, its massive weapons offline, its shields flickering with half-restored power. It was awake but not yet ready. The tension inside grew unbearable. To stay hidden meant risking discovery without defense. To reveal themselves meant facing enemies they were not yet prepared to fight. The choice weighed heavier with every passing hour. Subplots unfolded in the midst of this pressure. One of the survivors discovered a chamber filled with data archives, sealed behind layers of code written in ancient human tongues. The system resisted their attempts to access it, but within the flickering screens lay fragments of forgotten strategies, maps of old wars, and perhaps instructions left by those who had built the ship. Unlocking it might reveal how to use the vessel's full strength, but time was slipping away, and every failed attempt brought frustration. Another survivor explored the lower decks, where strange organic systems pulsed beneath the metal, as though the ship itself was alive. Touching them sent shivers through her, visions of endless stars flashing before her eyes. She began to believe the ship was not just a weapon, but a guardian, one that chose its companions carefully. She felt it watching her, testing her resolve, and wondered if the others felt the same. At the same time, whispers of the black ship's awakening spread across the galaxy. On distant mining worlds, enslaved humans whispered in secret, passing the rumor from one laborer to the next. In hidden corners of alien cities, resistance cells stirred, wondering if the legend was true. Could a single ship reignite a war that had been lost for centuries? The empires dismissed such thoughts publicly, declaring the rumors false. But behind closed doors, they moved fleets into position. They would not allow even the hope of rebellion to survive. The conflict was not only with the empires, but within the survivors themselves. Fear clashed with hope, and unity threatened to crumble under the weight of doubt. Each of them carried scars from life under alien rule, loss, betrayal, hardship. Now thrust into the shadow of the black ship, those scars shaped their choices. One dreamed of freedom, another of revenge, another simply of survival. The ship demanded more than individual desires. It demanded unity. But unity was the hardest thing for those who had lived so long in brokenness. As the alien patrol ships drew closer, the survivors felt the tension rise like a storm about to break. The black ship pulsed beneath their feet, its systems whispering promises of power, but not yet giving them full control. It was as though it wanted them to prove themselves before it would truly awaken. They trained with what little knowledge they had, fumbling through controls older than their great-grandparents. Mistakes were costly. One wrong sequence sent a surge through the ship's core, nearly tearing systems apart. Yet with each failure, the vessel seemed to adjust, slowly bending toward their will. In the void beyond, the hunters closed in. Signals crackled across the survivors' consoles. Alien patrols, scanning closer, their weapons ready. The survivors argued again, their voices sharp in the ship's hollow halls. Should they risk firing the weapons now, revealing themselves but striking first? Should they try to flee deeper into the void, hoping the ship could outrun its pursuers? Or should they remain silent, trusting that the ship itself had a plan none of them yet understood? Each choice seemed like a gamble with no guarantee of survival. And as they stood at the brink of decision, the black ship stirred once more. Its voice rose within their minds, deeper than words, carrying the weight of centuries. It was not fear that echoed through them, but a command, a demand that they choose. The galaxy outside was closing in, the empires tightening their grip, the whispers of rebellion spreading like sparks. Inside, the survivors faced the impossible, to lead a war they did not understand, with a weapon they could barely control, against enemies who had already won once before. The conflict was no longer distant. It was here, pressing against their skin, waiting just beyond the ship's dark hull. The black ship's awakening had not ended their struggle. It had only sharpened it. And as the alien warships entered the system, their engines burning bright in the void, the survivors realized the truth. The first battle was about to begin, and they were not ready. Yet the ship's shadow stretched long across the stars, and within that shadow, destiny waited. The alien patrols slipped deeper into the system, their sleek ships cutting through the darkness with predatory patience. Their scanners swept every fragment of rock, every cold shadow, closing in on the source of the ancient signal. The survivors inside the black ship watched the readings flicker across the cracked displays, their stomachs sinking with every pass. The hunters were drawing near, and the black ship was still not fully awake. Its engines pulsed with half-restored power, its weapons hummed like beasts stirring from sleep, but nothing was certain. To fire too soon might break the fragile systems still repairing themselves. To remain hidden meant risking discovery with no chance to prepare. Each passing minute tightened the noose, and the silence inside the ship became unbearable. The survivors had tried to learn the vessel's controls, fumbling through the ancient systems with clumsy hands. Every command felt like a conversation with something alive, something that judged them before it obeyed. The black ship was more than metal and circuits. It was memory made flesh, and it demanded strength from those who touched it. They felt it watching them, pushing them, forcing them to confront their own fears. Some resisted, muttering that the ship could never be tamed. Others embraced the challenge, certain it would only follow those who were willing to bleed for its cause. The tension between them grew sharper, their whispered arguments echoing in the dark halls as the alien presence outside drew closer. One of them, the scavenger who had spent his life digging through wreckage, grew restless. He whispered that they should abandon the vessel, escape in one of the smaller pods before the hunters found them. The black ship, he said, was a curse, a relic too dangerous to carry. But the woman who had lost her family to alien chains stood against him, her eyes blazing. She refused to leave. To her, the ship was not a curse. It was the only chance they would ever have to fight back. Their voices clashed in the ship's command chamber, filling the silence with raw anger. Yet beneath their words lay fear, the same fear that gripped them all. None of them truly knew if the black ship would protect them, or if it would devour them as it had devoured so many before. The vessel itself seemed to sense their conflict. Its lights flickered, its engines thrummed, and its systems whispered fragments of old battles into their minds. Images of burning fleets, of captains who stood defiant even as their worlds fell, spilled into their thoughts. The survivors felt those memories pressing down on them, demanding they understand the weight of what they had awakened. The black ship had not been built for escape. It had been built for war, for sacrifice, for defiance against impossible odds. It would not follow those who chose to run. That truth sank into them like ice, and the arguments fell silent. They realized then that the ship had chosen them as much as they had chosen it, and if they failed, it would not be because the vessel was weak. It would be because they were. Beyond the hull, the alien patrol ships began their sweep of the asteroid field where the black ship lay hidden. Their engines glowed faintly, casting harsh light across the broken rocks. The survivors held their breath as the ships passed close, their sensors scanning the void. The black ship remained silent, cloaking its presence in shadows, but every flicker of alien light felt like a blade at their throats. The hunters moved methodically, certain their prey was near. It was only a matter of time before they stumbled across something they could not explain. And when they did, there would be no mercy. In the lower decks, the survivor who had discovered the strange living systems pressed deeper into the ship's heart. The organic chambers pulsed with faint light, each thrum in rhythm with the survivor's own heartbeats. She placed her hand against one of the glowing structures and felt it respond, a rush of heat and images flooding her mind. She saw glimpses of what the ship had once been, its fleets, its battles, its commanders who had given everything. But she also felt something else, something unfinished. The black ship had been waiting, holding back, refusing to unleash its full strength until those who touched it proved they were ready. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a test. And it was still deciding whether humanity was worthy of rising again. The conflict grew heavier as the alien fleets sent reinforcements. Patrols became squadrons, squadrons became formations. The hunters were no longer probing. They were closing in for the kill. The survivors watched in silence, as the enemy moved into position, their ships circling like wolves around wounded prey. The scavenger clenched his fists, muttering that they were doomed. The woman with fire in her eyes stood straighter, her jaw tight. She whispered that she would rather die here aboard the Black Ship than live another day in chains. Her words struck deep into the others, reminding them why they had stepped into this shadow in the first place. They had nothing left to lose but their lives, and everything to gain if the Black Ship truly woke. The galaxy beyond their hidden system also stirred. News of the signal had spread too far to be contained. On mining colonies, whispers turned to chants, and chants turned to sparks of rebellion. Humans who had long bent their heads under alien rule now looked to the stars with defiance in their eyes. Resistance groups sent coded transmissions, desperate to learn if the legend was true. The empires moved quickly to crush these sparks, but they were too late. The mere rumor of the Black Ship's return was enough to shake their grip. And though the survivors aboard the vessel could not hear those distant voices, they felt the weight of them all pressing against their shoulders. They carried the hopes of millions, whether they wanted to or not. The alien fleets drew nearer, their numbers growing, their weapons charged. The survivors prepared in silence, each movement heavy with dread. They had trained as best they could, fumbling through systems they barely understood, but they knew they were outmatched. The Black Ship had power, but only if it chose to unleash it. They stood at its helm, hands trembling over ancient controls, waiting for the moment when hiding would no longer be possible. Every breath felt like the last before a storm. Every heartbeat echoed the ship's pulse, steady and deep, as if it was waiting for them to prove themselves one final time. Inside the ship's core, a new chamber opened, its doors groaning as though reluctant to reveal what lay within. The survivors stepped inside and found a chamber lined with glowing runes, etched into the walls like stars themselves. At the center stood a console, its surface shimmering with energy. When they touched it, the ship's voice thundered in their minds, clearer than ever before. It demanded unity. It demanded sacrifice. It demanded that they cast aside fear and stand as one, or be consumed by the weight of their weakness. The survivors looked at each other in silence, their doubts burning away under the weight of that command. They were not ready, but they had no choice. The Black Ship would not wait forever. Outside, the alien ships closed the circle, their weapons locked, their captains eager to deliver the final blow. The survivors felt the pressure mounting, their hands trembling, their voices tight with fear. They could see the enemy now, streaks of light across the dark, engines glowing like fireflies closing in. The first warning shot streaked past, burning against the rocks, lighting the void with deadly brilliance. The Black Ship shuddered, its hull trembling as though it too felt the tension. Its systems flared, weapons humming louder, engines burning brighter, but still it waited. It would not act until those within made their choice. The survivors gripped the controls, sweat on their brows, knowing the moment had come. The hunters were here. The first battle was at their doorstep. The darkness of space lit with the glow of alien weapons, and the Black Ship's silence pressed heavy as a mountain. The survivors knew what was coming, but none of them knew if they would live to see the end of it. The ship's voice rose one final time, demanding their answer. The storm was about to break, and in that moment, before the first strike landed, everything hung suspended. The climax was near. The void trembled with light as alien weapons carved across the asteroid field, each blast a warning of what was to come. The survivors clutched the Black Ship's controls, sweat beading on their brows, their voices tight with fear. The vessel's systems burned with rising power, its hum deep and steady, but still it held back. It demanded unity. It demanded resolve. The survivors had no choice but to stand together, though doubt still gnawed at them. Then, just as the first barrage seared against the rocks, something happened that none of them expected. The Black Ship did not fire back. Instead, its sensors expanded outward, piercing deeper into the void. Strange signals poured onto their screens. Signals not from the alien fleets closing in, but from somewhere else, distant yet unmistakable. Another voice. Another heartbeat. The survivors froze as the realization struck. The Black Ship was not alone. Somewhere, in the far reaches of the galaxy, another signal had answered the call. For centuries, they had believed this vessel was the only one left, the final warship of humanity. Yet the evidence now blazed across their consoles. A second ship had stirred, buried in silence until the awakening had reached it. The revelation was like a knife cutting through certainty. If one ship was dangerous enough to rattle the empires, then two meant something far greater, a fleet that could rise again. But with that hope came a deeper fear. The signal from the second ship did not match the steady pulse of their own. It was distorted, sharp, aggressive, carrying with it an energy that felt more like a warning than an ally's call. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances. Had another human warship truly awakened, or had something else taken hold of it? The black ship's systems flickered, almost as if it too was unsettled by the discovery. In its hum, there was no triumph, only a low tension, as though it recognized an old rival stirring. The survivors realized the second ship might not come to their aid. It might come as a threat. The legend they had uncovered was no longer singular. The galaxy now faced the return of more than one sleeping giant, and no one knew what that meant. Outside, the alien fleets continued their encirclement, unaware of the deeper danger. They pressed closer, their weapons cutting through the rocks, searching for the hidden vessel. But the survivors' attention was divided now, torn between the immediate threat and the distant signal that pulsed through the stars. The conflict had escalated beyond a single battlefield. The awakening had spread farther than they imagined, and the galaxy was no longer facing only one ship's return. In the command chamber, the woman who had sworn vengeance felt her resolve harden. If another ship had awakened, then humanity's chance for rebirth was greater than anyone dared dream. Yet the scavenger's fear only deepened. To him, the second signal was proof of disaster. If the black ship itself was a burden too heavy for them to control, what hope did they have if another, perhaps corrupted by time, returned as well? His doubts grew louder, echoing through the chamber, pushing cracks into their fragile unity. The black ship responded in its own way. Its systems flared, projections spilling across the chamber's walls. They saw visions of humanity's final war, the desperate days when multiple ships had been unleashed against overwhelming enemies. The images showed destruction on a scale none of them had imagined. Entire fleets torn apart, stars burning under human firepower. But among those visions was something darker, a glimpse of betrayal, a ship that had turned, refusing the will of its commanders, bending its purpose in ways that had doomed countless lives. The survivors understood then what the black ship was trying to warn them. The second signal might not be a savior at all. It might be the ghost of a betrayal long buried, now waking with its own purpose. The tension inside the ship grew unbearable. Every choice carried new dangers. They were moments away from being discovered by the alien fleets, but their minds were already haunted by the greater threat rising somewhere far beyond. To fight here might expose them too soon, giving their enemies the proof they needed to unleash their full strength. But to flee meant risking confrontation with a second ship whose loyalty they could not trust. Either path led toward conflict, but neither offered certainty. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, whispers of the awakening spread faster. Resistance groups caught fragments of the second signal, and their excitement turned to unease. If more ships existed, then humanity's destiny was truly at hand. Yet if those ships carried more than one will, more than one purpose, then the chance of salvation might collapse into chaos. The empires, too, detected the second pulse, and their fear doubled. They had prepared to strike down one legend, but two meant the possibility of a storm they could not contain. Fleets were recalled, armadas repositioned, and spies dispatched into every shadow where rumors burned. The galaxy shifted into a new state of fear, and the survivors inside the black ship felt that weight pressing on them from every side. In the lower decks, the survivor who had touched the organic systems began to hear faint whispers that were not her own. The ship was trying to communicate more clearly now, pouring images and impressions into her mind. But buried within that flood was something she did not expect, a glimpse of the second vessel. She saw its hull cracked but alive, its systems burning with violent energy. She felt its hunger, sharp and unyielding, like a predator roused from hibernation. It did not feel like an ally. It felt like something that had waited too long, something that would not share its purpose with anyone. She staggered back, her heart racing, the weight of that vision pressing on her. She whispered to the others what she had seen, and their silence grew heavier. The conflict inside the ship mirrored the conflict in the galaxy. Hope clashed with fear, unity with doubt. The survivors stood on the edge of two battles, the one pressing against their hull now, and the one waiting somewhere in the stars. The black ship's hum grew louder, insistent, as though urging them to prepare. The alien fleets outside tightened their noose, their weapons glowing brighter, their signals sharp and hostile. And far beyond, the second signal pulsed again, stronger this time, as if it too was preparing to move. The survivors had thought they were awakening a legend, a single vessel to challenge the empires. Now they realized they were standing at the beginning of something larger, more dangerous than they had ever dreamed. Humanity's destiny was not just to rise again, it was to face itself. The black ship's memories had shown them the truth. Not every human warship had been loyal in the end, and not every echo from the past could be trusted. The second ship's awakening was proof of that. The stakes had doubled. The survivors' choices no longer determined only their own survival. They would shape how humanity returned to the galaxy, united or divided against itself. And as the first alien blast scorched the rocks closer than ever before, the black ship's voice thundered through their minds, not with comfort, but with a command. Prepare. The hunters were at the door. The traitor's shadow was stirring, and the storm was about to break. The survivors stood trembling in the silence, knowing that whatever came next would decide not just their fate, but the fate of a galaxy that had already begun to unravel. The alien fleet closed its circle, their ships glowing like blades in the dark. The survivors inside the black ship felt the weight of their decision pressing harder than ever. They had no more time to argue, no more time to doubt. The hunters were here, and soon the galaxy would know whether the return of humanity was truth or only myth. The hum of the ship deepened, its engines trembling as if they too sensed the moment had arrived. The survivors stood together at the helm, hands tight on the ancient controls, their eyes locked on the enemy swarming outside. The first barrage struck the field of rocks where they hid, exploding with blinding force. Shards of stone spun into the void, scattering across the hull of the black ship. The vessel groaned, its shields flickering to life at last, humming with blue fire as they absorbed the shock. The survivors gasped, staring at the sudden glow rippling across the walls. The black ship had finally answered, no longer testing, no longer waiting. It was ready. The scavenger who had feared it the most felt the vibration under his feet, and in that instant his doubt burned away. Whatever came next, this ship was alive, and it had chosen them. The enemy pressed in, their weapons blazing, determined to crush the legend before it could rise. But the black ship surged forward, engines roaring like thunder. In a single burst of light, it broke free of the asteroid field, its shadow stretching across the enemy fleet. Alien captains shouted orders, their ships turning to meet the threat. Yet nothing in their training had prepared them for what they faced. The black ship unleashed its fire. Beams of energy, ancient but sharper than any weapon the galaxy had known, cut across the void. Entire squadrons vanished in the first strike, their ships torn apart like paper. Explosions lit the darkness, scattering debris across the stars. The survivors cried out, half in terror and half in awe, as the black ship moved with precision and fury. It was not clumsy or slow as they had feared. It was a predator, awakened and hungry. The enemy tried to regroup, their fleet surrounding the vessel, but every move they made was answered. The black ship fought as though it remembered every battle it had ever faced, predicting their maneuvers, striking before they could react. Yet even in the midst of its fury, a shadow lingered. The second signal pulsed again, stronger now, closer. The survivors felt it through the ship's systems, a rival heartbeat pounding in the distance. The black ship shuddered, its lights flickering as if straining against something unseen. The survivors realized the second ship was no longer waiting, it was moving. And it was coming straight toward them. The battle outside raged, the alien fleets breaking under the onslaught. But the survivors could not celebrate. They knew the true test had not yet arrived. The woman with fire in her eyes gripped the console tighter, her voice low and steady. She whispered that this was never just about defeating the empires. It was about facing the truth of what humanity had left behind. The scavenger nodded, his fear replaced with grim acceptance. Whatever the second ship was, they would face it here, now, with no chance to run. The alien armada fractured, their commanders retreating, unwilling to waste more ships against the impossible. Some fled in panic, others lingered to watch, but none dared press forward. The black ship held the field, its shadow vast and terrible, a legend made flesh once more. But as silence fell over the wreckage, the survivors felt no victory. The second signal roared into the system, tearing through space with the force of a storm. And then it appeared. From the darkness came another warship, black like their own, but scarred and broken in ways that spoke of centuries of rage. Its hull burned with red light, its engines crackled with wild power. It moved like a beast unchained, every motion sharp, violent, hungry. The survivors stared in horror. This was no ally. This was the betrayer the black ship's memories had warned them about. Another vessel of humanity, yes, but twisted by time, its purpose no longer defense but domination. The two ships faced each other in silence, their massive forms casting shadows across the stars. The survivors felt the black ship tremble beneath their feet, its systems alive with fury. It recognized its rival, and the hatred between them burned like fire. The survivors understood they were not only fighting to survive the empires. They were fighting to decide what humanity would become. The rival ship moved first, unleashing a barrage of crimson fire. The black ship reeled as its shields flared, struggling against the power of its twin. The survivors were thrown from their feet, alarms blaring through the halls. The woman pulled herself up, shouting commands, her hands steady even as the ship shook. The black ship responded, striking back with beams of searing light, tearing across the enemy's hull. The void erupted in fire as the two ancient warships clashed, their battle echoing across the galaxy. Alien fleets that had lingered to watch scattered in panic. None dared interfere in the duel. This was no longer a battle between empires and rebels. It was something older, something greater. It was the heart of humanity's legacy, torn between guardianship and destruction. Played out in the shadows of two surviving war machines. The survivors fought with everything they had, their fear burning into focus. They guided the black ship as best they could, though much of the battle seemed to move on its own, as if the vessel itself remembered the enemy too well. The rival ship pressed harder, its weapons tearing into the void with ruthless fury. For every strike the black ship delivered, its twin answered with equal force. The survivors felt their resolve falter as the battle dragged on, the two vessels locked in a struggle that seemed endless. Then the unexpected twist came. As the ships clashed, the black ship opened its archives fully for the first time. The survivors were flooded with visions, not of battles, but of the people who had built it. They saw the faces of men and women who had poured their lives into its creation, who had bound their hopes into its frame. They heard voices whispering across time, promising that this ship was not meant to destroy, but to protect. The survivors realized then what the black ship demanded of them. It did not want commanders who sought power. It wanted guardians who would carry its purpose forward. With new clarity, they stood together at the helm, their voices united as they guided the vessel. The black ship responded with a surge of energy unlike anything before. Its weapons blazed brighter, its shields hardened, its engines roared. The rival ship faltered, caught off guard by the sudden unity. The black ship struck with precision, cutting deep into its twin's hull. Explosions ripped through the rival, its lights flickering, its fury breaking apart. But just as victory seemed within reach, the rival ship unleashed one final attack. A desperate, savage strike that tore into the black ship's side, shaking it to its core. Systems screamed, lights dimmed, and the survivors were thrown once more into chaos. The rival vessel drifted, crippled and broken, but not destroyed. Its shadow lingered in the void, a reminder that humanity's legacy was not yet whole, not yet united. The survivors stood in silence, breathing hard, the black ship groaning around them. They had won the battle, but not the war. The empires had seen the truth, the galaxy had witnessed the clash, and the rivals still lived, waiting in the dark. Humanity had returned, but so had its fracture. And as the black ship steadied itself, its voice rose once more in their minds, colder now, sharper. It whispered not of triumph, but of warning. The survivors realized the twist they had not expected. The awakening of the Black Ship had not just rewritten the fate of the conquered galaxy. It had awakened a war between humanity's own creations, a war that would decide not only who ruled the stars, but what humanity itself would become. The climax had come. But the future was more uncertain than ever. The silence after the battle was heavy, stretching across the void like a wound that would never quite heal. The wreckage of alien fleets drifted in shattered arcs, glowing faintly as their fires burned themselves out. The rival ship floated crippled but alive, its hull cracked and bleeding light, its engines flickering like the last breaths of a dying beast. The survivors inside the Black Ship stood in the dim glow of failing lights, their bodies bruised, their voices hoarse, but their hearts still beating. They had endured. Against all odds, they had stood in the shadow of both empire and betrayal, and they were still alive. For a long moment, no one spoke. They simply listened to the low hum of the Black Ship, steady despite the damage it had taken. It had fought with them, bled with them, and in the end, it had trusted them. The woman with fire in her eyes ran her hand across the console, whispering words that were not orders, but thanks. The scavenger, who had once begged to run, lowered his head in quiet respect. He no longer doubted the ship. He no longer doubted himself. The Black Ship had awakened not only in the void, but within them as well. As repairs flickered across its systems, the survivors felt the vessel begin to stabilize. It would heal, though slowly. The rival ship drifted at a distance, broken but not destroyed. Its presence lingered like a shadow, a reminder that humanity's legacy was not united. They could not chase it now, not in their condition. But they all understood it would return one day, and when it did, it would bring the same fury it had carried tonight. The Black Ship did not need to speak for them to know the truth. This battle had only been the first in a greater struggle still to come. The galaxy beyond was already shifting. The alien empires had witnessed the battle. Their fleets had watched from the edges as two ancient human warships clashed with power that rivaled entire armadas. The legend was no longer rumor. It was truth. Humanity had returned, and with its return came questions the empires could not ignore. Fear spread across their halls of power, mixed with frantic debates. Some called for immediate war to crush the Black Ship before it could rally humanity. Others urged caution, knowing that open conflict against something so powerful could destroy their rule. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was uncertain, and that uncertainty was dangerous. On the scattered colonies where humans still lived in chains, the whispers became louder. The Black Ship had fought. It had survived. Some had seen the flashes of its battle streaking across the skies. Others had intercepted fragments of its signal. Across the stars, hope spread like fire in dry grass. Resistance cells that had long been quiet stirred with new life, daring to plan openly. On mining worlds, workers looked at their alien overseers not with fear, but with defiance. The survivors aboard the Black Ship could not see all of it, but they felt it in their bones. The galaxy had changed because of what they had done. Inside the ship, the survivors also faced their own truths. The woman who had fought for vengeance began to see something larger than her grief. She understood now that the Black Ship was not built for vengeance alone. It was built for protection, for the survival of something greater than herself. The scavenger, once broken by fear, now felt the strength of purpose for the first time in his life. He knew he had been given more than survival. He had been given meaning. And the one who had touched the ship's living systems still felt its whispers in her mind, soft now, no longer testing, but guiding. She knew that the vessel had accepted them as its guardians. And with that acceptance came responsibility none of them could walk away from. They spent days repairing what they could, learning from the ship as it healed itself. Each system they touched revealed more of its memory, more of the truth left behind by those who had built it. They discovered messages encoded deep in its core, written by the last commanders of humanity's fleet. The messages were not of victory, but of resilience. They spoke of sacrifice, of duty, of the belief that one day someone would rise to carry the fight again. Reading those words, the survivors understood their place in history. They were not heroes chosen by destiny. They were ordinary people who had stumbled into a burden and refused to run from it. And that, more than anything, was what made them worthy. When the black ship was ready, they turned their gaze outward. The rival ship had disappeared into the dark, retreating to lick its wounds, but its shadow remained. They knew it would rise again, and when it did, the galaxy would tremble once more. But until that day, they had work to do. The black ship did not exist to hide. It existed to remind the galaxy that humanity could not be erased. The survivors set their course toward the colonies where humans still labored under chains, determined to show them the truth with their own eyes. As the engines flared, carrying the vessel into the endless night, the survivors reflected on what they had become. They were not soldiers when they began, not leaders or heroes. They were broken people, caught in a galaxy that had forgotten them. But in the shadow of the black ship, they had risen. They had fought not only for themselves, but for all who had been silenced. The ship had awakened, but so had they. The unexpected twist of another warship, a betrayer from the past, had changed everything. The galaxy now knew that humanity's legacy was not united, that danger could come from both friend and foe, but that truth only deepened the survivors' resolve. They understood that their struggle was not just against the empires who ruled the stars. It was also against the mistakes of their own kind, against the darkness that had once torn humanity apart. To fight that battle would take more than weapons. It would take unity, trust, and the courage to carry hope even when it felt impossible. The black ship's hum grew steady, a sound that filled them with quiet strength. It was no longer just a relic of war. It was a promise carried through time, a promise that humanity would endure. As they left the battlefield behind, the survivors looked at one another and felt something stronger than fear, stronger than vengeance. They felt purpose. They were not running anymore. They were rising, and so the story of the black ship's awakening came to its close, not with triumph, not with finality, but with the beginning of something greater. The galaxy had been conquered, but its destiny had not been written. With the black ship alive once more, and its guardians at the helm, the stars themselves seemed to lean forward, waiting to see what humanity would choose to become. The survivors knew the road ahead would be long and filled with trials, but they no longer doubted the path. They carried the weight of the past, the fire of the present, and the hope of the future. The black ship sailed into the void, its shadow vast, its engines burning bright, a reminder to all who saw it that legends are never truly lost. They only sleep, waiting for the moment to awaken and change the galaxy forever. And with that, the legend of the black ship was no longer a whisper. It was a reality written in fire, in courage, and in the unbreakable will of those who refused to be forgotten. The conquered galaxy had been reminded of one truth that could not be silenced. Humanity had returned, and its destiny had only just begun.